My name is Jatinder Verma. I am the Artistic Director of Tara Arts.
Thank you very much. Were you born in the UK?
No, I wasn't actually. I came from East Africa at the age of 14. I was born in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, but grew up in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's from there that we came.
But when you came to England, it wasn't London that you first arrived to, no?
No, initially, so my first schooling was in Manchester. And we stayed there for 3 months and came to London at the same time as Martin Luther King was assassinated,
Wow.
April 68.
Wow. So would you say, that when asked that question of where you were brought up, would you say, Nairobi? Would you say England?
Brought up is Nairobi, of course. I mean, I was in my second year of secondary school when we left.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, I was a kind of the template of me had, to an extent, been formed.
Yeah.
I think the critical ingredient in that template, which was missing, was that of being a migrant, and that occurred as a result of coming here.
Of course. Why did you get involved in South Asian theatre?
Theatre was an interest, I mean, back in East Africa as much as it was when I came here. So, in school, I'd taken part in a wonderful play. Going to university, was doing plays, had in fact formed a company before going to university.
Did you study theatre at university?
I didn't study theatre, I studied history. So, on one level, there was a kind of an abiding interest in theatre. The spark, really, was the death of Gurdeep Singh Chaggar in July 1976 in Southall. And that death affected us all in different ways. And when I say us, it was not just young people, but uniquely also older people. It was the most sort of dramatic statement of what it would mean to live in this country as a nation. And it occurred when I was waiting for the results of my degree exam. And I remember crying reading the headlines. And that was a sort of instinctive reaction, which many had. And very fortunately, I met up with individuals that I knew from before university who'd had much the same response. And one thing led to another, and that really was the stimulus for doing theatre. And I suppose why it needed that spur was theatre for what? Why do theatre? And that's what Gurdeep Singh Chaggar gave us, really.
Yeah.
A kind of cause, a reason to be in the theatre. Given that, we had no experience of it, no formal training.
So would you say that's where your journey began, and that was your
Totally. I mean, that's where the journey, in terms of not just theatre, but turning this into a life, is to do with Gurdeep Singh Chaggar.
And do you think that's always been maintained?
Yes, yes. I mean, when I say it's always been maintained over the nearly 4 decades now of the company, there have been various ways in which that impulse for wanting to do theatre has been expressed. So from overtly political plays to plays which apparently are not political, but aesthetically are posing a kind of challenge to established ways of doing theatre.
Mm-hmm.
So in all sorts of ways, it's that spirit of what happened to Gurdeep Singh Chaggar, which sort of carries on in terms of provides an impulse for a company like this.
Of course. So when you were first involved in theatre, had you always thought to be a director?
No. I think that my journey in the theatre is rather like a lot of people who come from a kind of non-formal background. No kind of formal training as such within the profession. You sort of are a jack of all trades initially. So I was an actor, writer. I was very prepared to bring in directors because I was aware that I didn't know enough to learn. But progressively, I suppose it was around 83, 84, I made the decision to get out of acting. And in part, it was a recognition of the wonderful actors I was seeing in front of me and what they could do. And that this was a art form that I couldn't aspire to. I didn't have it in me. I still think acting is the highest of all professions because it is so demanding on the individual. I think they're special beings, people who are actors, and not everyone can be. And so I began to kind of focus much more on being a director and the craft of the director and the craft of structure in terms of storytelling and so on and so forth.
But before you formally chose to make this your full-time occupation, what were you doing for a living?
This. I was running Tara.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So, that was an era when you could use your unemployment benefit for any other kind of purpose. So my unemployment benefit went in that. At times I had various sort of jobs, working in a bank and so on and so forth. In the early years, Tara was always an evening occupation.
Yes.
That was up to about 1980. Then I'd got a grant to keep one person employed, which was me, to run the company and organize the tours and everything else. That lasted for a year, and then there was no money. So, you sort of lived off the dole. You did sort of fundraising and so on and so forth, and kept it going, really.
Since then, of course, since those evening sessions of Tara Arts, there's a whole genre being created of British South Asian theatre. What does being British South Asian then mean to you?
First of all, I would say that I don't like the term British South Asian. It seems to me it's a lazy tautology. The word Asian has a meaning only in Britain.
Yeah.
It has a very specific meaning in Britain, in that it's people who have some connection with the subcontinent of India and that sort of region. It's not used in the same way in America, in Europe, and so on and so forth. It also is a specifically colonial term invented by the British in East Africa as a way of trying to kind of avoid nationalistic divisions that came about in 47, with the independence of India and Pakistan. So they invented this term Asian. And for me, that's the term which remains still vibrant and meaningful. And what for me and for those of us who founded the company, it always meant is a dynamic connection with cultures rather than an insular looking inward at one's prosaic little culture. So if you like, for us the term Asian was not a ghetto sensibility. It was a sensibility of the world. How our experiences echo or connect with the experiences of the Irish, of gypsies here, of new migrants to this country, of the Jews who came before us, of blacks in America. That's the kind of tick, if you like, which for us was terribly important and remains to date. Which is why, for me and Tara, over the years, to take on and produce Shakespeare or European classics is not a contradiction at all. The world of stories, the world of the theatre, belongs to us, whether it's written by a nation or not. Yeah. And it's our job, if we feel like it, to do it.
Yeah. Given that, and taking this ghost of a word then, British South Asian, would you characterise your work within that classification?
Yes, I mean, I have no hesitation about it. What has been extraordinary is that the story of Tara has not confined us, has not confined me as a director, has not confined actors who've worked for me. We've done everything and we can do everything. Whether it's a Shakespeare play or whether it's a kind of modern play written by a nation about Asian affairs. So that's what I am. Yes. And that's what the company is. And there is no point denying it. And I can take on the world from that.
One of the questions being asked is whether your work is associated or to be associated with any one particular South Asian community.
No, I don't think it has an association with any particular South Asian community. And I suppose part of it is because we've tried assiduously not to go down the faith route. Yeah. I think faith has a place in human life, but not in the theatre. Theatre is faith. That's what we're doing. We're creating each time, with each performance, with each relationship with an audience, a moment of faith. Without the paraphernalia of priests and so on and so forth. And for me, that's enough. So I can read any story of any faith as stories. Yeah. Not as beliefs.
While we're still using that term, British South Asian theatre then, I'm just going to stick with it for a little while longer and put all those questions together in this little section. Do you think then it's still useful to consider British South Asian theatre as a distinct genre?
I think today, if one looks at the kind of range of practice, it's a difficult kind of question, and it's difficult to answer definitively one way or the other. And one reason for that is that the theatre culture that we have in this country, unlike in Europe, in Russia, in other parts of the world, is not motivated by form. It's motivated by narrative. So the aesthetics of it is not of great concern. Hence, we did not have a Grotowski or a Barber. Hence, Peter Brook had to leave the country in order to find a kind of theatrical language overseas. So that's kind of one context for my sort of ambiguous answer to the potency of the term Asian. If we then look at the second part of that, which is that in terms of the Asian companies to date that have grown up in England, by and large, they've grown up with the impulse to offer opportunities to fellow Asian directors, writers, actors, and so on and so forth, and have been less concerned with the form of it, with the aesthetics, if you like. so have been, in a way, the theatrical practice is not a specific dramaturgy, which in itself carries a point, if you like, a political point. We, in the early 80s, had posed a question to ourselves, which is what makes us an Asian theatre company. And when we looked at our work up to then, we said, well, it's the skin of the color of the skin of the people who take part. And it's the kind of material we are doing, looking at immigration, race, relationships between young and old, and so on and so forth. And we kind of said to ourselves, well, that's quite a narrow definition. And to a large extent, it's predicated on the current state of race relations. When that state changes, loosens up, people become more comfortable with each other, the need for such a company will disappear. So we then started saying to ourselves, no, there's got to be an aesthetic answer to this question. What is the actual theatre craft? That it's the dramaturgy which should define Asian, not the color of the skin of the participants. And that's really when we began to say to ourselves, well, look, the real irony is that here we are in apparent opposition to the status quo as far as theatre is concerned. One of the impulses is, well, there are not enough opportunities outside, we don't get the space to do our own stories, and so we create our own. That's a fine impulse. But the irony in our case was that the form in which we expressed that, the dramaturgy, was no different to anything that was here. It was the same kind of naturalistic kitchen sink drama. And that's when we began to question this very dominant convention of realism and say to ourselves, well, that's not the only form of theatre. What are other forms of theatre which do not prescribe to this kind of photographic sense of realism? And that's when we started looking at the theatres of Asia and Africa and realized actually there's a whole other world of dramaturgy which is not dependent upon the European model of the naturalistic play. And that if we are to have meaning as an Asian theatre company, we need to have a dialogue as much with that dramaturgy as it is with the European dramaturgy. And so therefore build a dramaturgy which defines our Asianness. And hence began the experiments with the fact of using movement and music as part of the dramatic language, and using language itself, the spoken word, not just in the purest sense of English, but all the other languages which form part of the heart of Asians, be they South Asian languages or any other languages that people are from. Now, it seems to me, to finally end that question, that this search for a distinctively Asian aesthetic, theatre aesthetic, is still a continuing search. It can't end, because once it ends, it's dead. And part of what makes it so complex is that while we can look at the theatres of China, Japan, India, Pakistan, and say, right, that's Japanese theatre, or a particular brand of Japanese theatre, and we can derive great meaning from it. It's difficult to do it in the context of a migrant theatre, and it's the migration aspect of our work, or the migration influence, if you like, or the impulse in our work, that makes it a kind of dynamic process rather than a fixed one. Because part of the migrant's dilemma, if I take it away from theatre altogether, is that the first generation has got sort of two worlds colliding in its heart. And there are two worlds in every sense: language, taste, custom, body, all that. Imagination, that's colliding in the heart. That's the fate of the first generation. You can't escape it. The second generation invariably rebels against, if you like, the old country. At least one part of the heritage rebels against, not interested. It's got to make its life in this new world. The third generation wants to go back to, wants to make connection with where one came from. And so in that sense, it is a kind of constantly fluid process where all we are really trying to do is to kind of answer the question, why am I in the theatre? Now, what's it for? What's it doing? What, other than doing a play, what is it? What is it? How is it forming myself?
Which leads us nicely to the next question. Also, given that then this the issue of the British South Asian theatre aesthetic is constantly in flux, is there a common thread, you think, between the stories that British South Asian theatre practitioners convey?
To an extent, one would say that there are common threads. You know, I think one thing that was pretty much in all Asian theatres is the way in which memory is being negotiated. There's always a kind of sense of then and now. It could be through different characters, you know, three different generations of characters, an older person and a younger person. It could be through the conflict of custom and tradition. And that's what I mean by memory. There's a sort of memory one's having to negotiate. So I think that's a theme. I think there is another theme which is sort of related to memory, which is that while, if on the one hand there is this negotiation, which is more a kind of internal negotiation between one's history and one's self now, there is another level of negotiation which is with one's experience of being in a country where you are a minority. Whatever way you look at it, whatever weight you put on that, you are a minority. That's a fact. You know, you're a minority by definition of your color. Sometimes also a minority by definition of your faith. Minority by definition of your dress, your eating habits. You know, there are all sorts of things. And population-wise, you're a minority. Maximum 10% of the population. So that's a fact, and you have to deal with it. And that opens up, I suppose, a third sort of theme. If memory is one, race in its different guises, or Britain in its different guises is another, then I think a kind of third is a sort of a desperation to make a story. It's almost like there is a sense that these stories have not been told, and so I have to tell it. I have to let everyone know. So I'd say that those are kind of common threads across a range of, you know, different companies, different ways of doing theatre within this broad Asian spectrum.
Going back now to the personal story you were telling us about as to your original inspiration to coming into theatre, you just go back there for a little while again. What was your reaction? What was the reaction, rather, of your friends and family when you decided this is what you were going to do with your life?
Look, we are part of a community certainly the middle class of this community, which sees no value in the theatre, no value in the arts. And that doesn't make us too dissimilar from the general white population. And we know it just through the government's responses to the arts, any governments. Most people can't understand it. Why are you guys just messing around with public stuff? Do something proper. And I think in much the same way with us when we started, there was a similar kind of response. I think partly with the Asians, or certainly in our case with our families, it's been inflected by the fact that the arts have a derogatory place in Asian life. Pimps and prostitutes are artists, which also happens to be the condition of all artists. We are rogues and vagabonds. We'll lie, steal, cheat, do anything to put the play on. That's our purpose. And it's an odd one because that's actually what is the case with all artists, all theatre people, anywhere in the world. Right down to today. There are huge numbers of troops in India, for example, in Pakistan, which produce superlative theatre, but which are ostracized from their communities. They are given this particular frame, or these are these guys, and they are patronized that way. That's the nature. That's the fate of all who want to be in the theatre. That's why I say it's so difficult. Don't expect to be befriended in the theatre. Don't expect your community to love you. They'll hate you. They love what you do, but they will never support you because it's not an acceptable thing. And I think once one recognizes that, you say, okay, fine. Maybe there's another way of persuading and so on and so forth. But one needs to be aware of that. So this is where I think it's terribly important that if we talk of Asian theatre, we are just wary of saying, I'm doing this for the community. I am not doing it for any community. I'm first and foremost doing it for everyone because I am part of everyone. And embedded in that is because I'm doing it for myself. This is all I can do. You accept it, fine. You don't accept it, okay. Don't come to the show. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for your betterment. That's a dishonest thing. Of course, I am fantastically grateful and always delighted when I see Asians in the audience. It sort of affirms what this is about, which is to cross cultures, for everyone to be there. But the play is not dependent. It cannot be dependent on one community. The only community it's dependent upon is those that love theatre. That's all. And that, of course, constantly changes from decade to decade.
Of course. There was also, in the story of your original inspiration, I don't think it'd be wrong to call it a trauma. Death to Gurdeep Singh Chadha. You've explained what happened there, but would you also mind explaining how that made you feel personally?
I think the thing with the Gurdeep Singh Chadha death was that you knew that but for an accident, that could have been you. He was a 17-year-old boy. He was walking about in the streets in Southall at 7 o'clock in the evening on a July day, which means it was bright sunshine. And he got killed. He didn't get killed because someone knew him, those 4 people who killed him, knew that he was Gurdeep Singh Chadha. He didn't get killed because he was a boy. He got killed because he looked like a Paki. He looked like a foreigner. And he was fair game. And in all our experiences up to then, well, we'd had enough of similar type of experiences to know that it could have been me. And I think in addition to that, the sort of trauma of it really was that one act made our entry into England meaningless. If the whole point of coming to England was to die on a street in a suburb when you're 17, why bother leaving? And in a way, out of the depth of that hurt, welled this thing of, no, we're here and we're here to stay. But there has to be one condition of our stay, which is that we have to remake this country in our image. And specifically, it meant in the theatre, well, yes, do it in English, but make it your English. Put yourself in it. Bring your stories in. Challenge the status quo. And if you don't, there's no point in migrating. There's no point. You might as well stay wherever it is you came from, because that's the kind of accepted status quo that you were comfortable with. And I suppose then the third level of it that was part of the same understanding of that death was this recognition that certainly in our lifetimes, that sort of kicking against the pricks, as Joe Orton put it, is going to be a lifetime exercise. It can't stop. Because the country will never be, you're not going to wake up one day and racism is dead. You're not going to wake up one day and the whole country has changed. It isn't going to happen. It's going to happen only by you constantly doing it.
Yeah. You've also had this experience of having been raised in East Africa. So how does that transnational experience, in your case, inform your identity?
It's a difficult one. I mean, I think on one level it is that the recognition that I'm a kind of double migrant. My parents came from India to East Africa. I'm born there. I grew up knowing nothing else except some idea of India. And then I arrive here. And part of the process of arrival here, and partly also the circumstances in which we were forced to migrate, meant that for quite a number of years, that part of me had to be killed off. It's not material. Africa is no longer relevant. And the only thing that became relevant was a kind of Indian identity, or a subcontinental one.
Right.
Because it was just too tiresome to try and explain to someone how come, you're brown and you come from Africa. But I think partly it was also affected by the fact that it was effectively a kind of forced migration. And so you didn't want to kind of deal with it.
Was it the era of Africanization?
It was the era of Africanization and a kind of double betrayal, really. Because it was the betrayal of the British that pushed Kenyan nations out in '68. And so this sort of sense of betrayal lingers on in your heart. And I know that in myself, that also magnified with feelings of somehow kind of betraying my parents, betraying my culture, betraying by being here.
Just by being.
Yeah, and I think that in that way it's a kind of, this is the burden any migrant carries, a sense of betrayal. Somehow you've left a land behind. And over a period of time, I began to recognize that actually Africa was coming in, or East Africa was coming in, without me being aware of it initially, through the textures and the colors that I was using. That those are specifically, or the ones that were evoking things in me, that those were specifically East African. They're not subcontinental. And in a way, I think that that's a kind of process that's sort of continuing on. But it's continuing on the basis of one fact. And that fact is that I can't, as a first generation migrant, there is no home for me. And I will die with that. And what I mean by that is not that I don't have a home. Of course I have a home, a partner, and all the rest of it. But that life cannot be recovered. It's like, obviously childhood can't be recovered, but you can live in the same country and you can revisit your childhood. In the first generation's case, there is no revisiting. That is a kind of a chopping of the head. And that's what you carry with you, that yes, there is that. And how that has manifested is that I find, perhaps because of that, that the only home I have is a place that I do. Mm-hmm. That's the only real home. So I'm in the business of constantly producing what ifs, different types of words. So that's, it sort of veered off into migration, but I think that's different from someone who's sort of brought up in one country and continues on, which is certainly the case with the second generation. With the third generation, of course, it's something else. They are looking to make connections with that other world that's been left behind. And that's just to do with, that's the natural rhythm of life. The grandchildren will always be fascinated with the grandparents.
A little while earlier you said that the only community that you're creating theatre for is a community of theatre lovers. Though, do you feel as though you are actually wanting to reach a particular audience whenever you create work?
No, the only particular audience I ever feel is the one that I see out on the street. It's kind of mixed audience. This is London. And that's what I want to see in the theatres.
And are they the audiences you're getting?
And those are the audiences I'm getting.
And so then, as an extension of that, what is it about your work you think that reflects the lives of the people who come to see your work, of the everyday people?
I think different plays will answer that question differently. If I was to do a kind of generalization, I would say that generally it is that for those who are migrants or in some way not quite English, there is an identification of seeing another kind of, in quotes, foreigner experience, but which is also completely accessible in a kind of wider community. For those who are, in quotes, natives, there is an excitement in seeing something exotic, something different. Both of those impulses, I think, are absolutely right and will always be there. I think also there is a sort of sense of just the excitement of a kind of vibrant theatricality. And that's just to do with the manner in which we do our work.
Yeah. The question posed here is, many people in rural areas don't feel as connected to theatre. How do you feel about that?
I agree. I think in England, rural theatre, which is the root of all theatre,
Right, of course.
in England as it is anywhere in the world, it comes out of the land. It comes out of the need at the end of harvest to tell a story, and then to make sure it's such a compelling one that people are held. It comes out of a need to celebrate a particular moment in the kind of rhythm of life on the land. So all impulses of all theatre come out of the land. In England, of course, the rural has become alien now. We are one of the most urbanized societies in the world. And the rural that is left is, by and large, I'm being too simplistic here, but it's by and large a kind of Disney idea of the rural. And one sees that the practicality of it is that most rural audiences would travel to a local town in order to see theatre. Having said that, I think that initiatives like the Rural Theatre Network are vitally important because they are tending to take theatre into specifically the rural locality, and something which we've been a part of as well over the years. And that's where, in a way, that's a kind of audience that I feel in the city we don't quite get, inevitably. So it gives us a reason for why we must tour.
The next one is a great question to be asking yourself in particular. Having seen British South Asian culture evolve for as long as you have, not to allude to your age at all, but also having seen British South Asian theatre evolve with the culture, how do you feel, generally just speaking, the changing South Asian experience in the UK has been reflected in theatre?
I think the most obvious reflection is in the audience. There is now, pretty much in every city, a ready audience for an Asian theatre piece. Assuming you do your job well and you market it well and so on and so forth. What is very definitely noticeable is that the kind of persuasion you had to do in the 70s is not of the same kind. So, more and more Asians are getting the experience of going into theatre and stuff, and so they are looking out for work that directly relates to them, or just work that's interesting. So I think if one looks at the audience, then there's definitely a shift in terms of Asian theatre. I think there's another area, which is within the profession itself, that there are increasing numbers of existing theatre houses and theatre companies where you're seeing more and more either Asian-specific work or just Asian performers and directors and so forth, or writers being produced. And that is certainly the case in terms of a development on, which it wasn't in the 70s and 80s. It still begs a question within the profession itself, how far there are consistent opportunities for Asian performers, directors, writers, across the range of theatre. I think that that's more limited. That hasn't shifted that much from the 70s. So I would say that in those two significant ways, audience and acting talent, or the theatre craft itself being more widely now seen. Those are the two changes one can readily point to.
And so where do you think we are today?
I think that's where we are. We are at that point.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? What it means is that, you see, when we started, if you like, the target was, if we had one wish, one goal, it was that in the imaginations of anyone, white, black, or Asian, the Asian would sit equally with the white. So in other words, that while one talked of Shakespeare, one could equally talk of Kalidasa. This sense of a cross-cultural, multicultural imagination was the goal. And to me, that still remains the goal. I think it's an open question as to what extent our imaginations are multicultural. All the signs are so far that they are not.
Yeah.
By and large, they remain on both sides of the fence. They remain largely monocultural. And that, I think, is more than a generation's work. And the only way one can hope to address it is to continue the work of companies like Tara as much as the work of companies or houses like the National and the RSC. In other words, there is a kind of an opening out to Asian talent, and equally an opening out to Asian stories. At the same time as amongst Asians, there's an opening out to the breadth of theatre, the stories of the world. And so that poses then the challenge, what take are you bringing to, I don't know, a play by Shakespeare or by Miller? What's the distinctive take? That makes it exciting. That makes it a point of interpretation. As much as, in the kind of mainstream houses, that it's a matter of course that a story of Kalidasa's is done, not to make a point, not to make a kind of access point, but because aesthetically it's valid, artistically it's valid, it's interesting.
And as you've just said, there has been, I suppose, one of the noticeable differences since your first arrival in the UK is the growing number of Asian communities across the country. Do you feel as though the theatre, South Asian theatre companies or theatre houses are showing accurately? Do you think the aesthetics of that theatre reflects accurately the communities across the country?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, only because there is one degree of inequality that has to be recognized. To compare Asian theatre with wider theatre is a false comparison, because the infrastructure simply doesn't exist in Asian theatre. To give you one point alone, how many theatre houses are there which are dedicated Asian theatre houses? None. Our studio is probably the only one. One is not enough. So what does a house give you? A house gives you, it's a theatre building, gives you a tangible home for a particular philosophy or a particular approach to theatre, for a particular set of stories. Critically, it gives you a tangible home for a particular set of career opportunities and career progression in a particular aesthetic. Mm-hmm. For your audiences, it gives you a place to come to where a whole variety of experiences of a variety of communities can be reflected. Now, what we have instead of that is not many companies, probably 10 consistent throughout the country, dealing with a population which, at its conservative, is at least 3 million. You can't expect them to reflect all the diversity of a community's interests.
Yes.
So I don't think that there is a complete reflection. And to an extent it can never be. I mean, I think the same thing could be said of theatre generally. How far does it reflect all the concerns of the nation as a whole? Well, not really. Only partially. There'll always be certain experiences which will not be expressed. And that's just to do with, you know, what strikes a writer, what strikes a director, or what strikes an actor in order to express it. And so the kind of final answer of that is that just the detailing of the answer in the way I've done it goes to prove one point. In the theatre, we don't do something for any particular community. We do it because we want to. And it's a happy coincidence if it touches upon a particular concern of a particular community at a particular moment in time. But we don't set out to, rather like manufacturers, you know, we don't do a survey and say, well, which brand of toothpaste would you like? And then serve it up. That's not our nature. Now, of course, it's slightly different in the commercial sector, and that is a very interesting area. That the only commercial sector within the Asian theatre scene is a specifically language sector. You know, so you have plays in Gujarati or in Urdu or Punjabi or whatever. Now, there, to an extent, they are serving particular communities, because other communities which fund it, which patronize it, say, yeah, here's some money, do it, and we'll bring our community in. And those are very localized. Those are for that particular language community, and that's it. They're not meant to be for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So, is it fair to say that, although you don't think that the breadth of theatre being created today reflects the breadth of the community, at the same time it's not particularly important for it to?
Yes, I agree. I don't think it's particularly important to. No theatre in this country, other than a commercial theatre, can be reduced to how far or how close it reflects a particular community.
Yes.
That kind of reductive definition of a theatre, I think, is very dangerous and flies against the very impulse of making theatre.
Yeah. And looking at it from the perspective of the theatre makers, what do you feel are the needs in changing in current times?
I think the needs have not actually shifted that much in the 4 decades. We are part of a culture which is heavily text-based. And we haven't really haven't unearthed, haven't supported a range of writers. There are very, very few. Probably you can count them on the fingers of one hand, who are very good and have lasted the course. So that's clearly a lack in the infrastructure. I think there's another lack, which is a range of directors. And primarily, I think there's a lack in terms of actors. Now that seems odd for me to say that, because certainly if I compare now to the 70s, there's a massive increase in terms of Asian actors. But you name me an actor that, like, we would follow, we would go and see because it says Simon Russell Beale or Helen Mirren. you name me an Asian actor like that we'd all go, yup, I want to go and see that. We haven't got those.
Is that a lack of talent that we haven't got?
Who knows? A combination of talent, of opportunity, because, the Mirrens and the Russell Beals, of course, they are enormously talented. But what has shaped their talent is a consistency of work, consistency of challenging high-quality work. It's a moot point how much Asian and black actors get that kind of consistent opportunity. And so the shaping of the talent, I mean, one doesn't know, but those two things go hand in hand. So I would say that what is still lacking in Asian theatre generally is this entire infrastructure, including the vitally important thing, which is the backstage.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be on stage, but the backstage is what actually makes you work. It lights you, it provides a sound, it feeds you, it provides you with the props, it creates the conditions on which you do your art.
Your responses have been hugely generous and giving. Thank you for that. Would you like to end just by telling us about any particular works of yours which are the most important to you?
Oh gosh. No, at different times you have different feelings about the work. And at this moment in time, partly because I'm reflecting on the death of one of my key actors from the early days. And I would pick out one of our earliest professional productions. It was called The Lion's Raj. And that was looking at the story of Gandhi in London. And it was in doing that we realized, and then put in the mouths of the Gandhi character, what it means to be an Asian. Because we saw him as the first Asian in Britain. And what it meant was, as we saw it through his life, was to be open to the whole world of influences. Not to say, well, that's English, or therefore irrelevant, or that's Chinese, or that's Russian, or what. Be open to the world of influences, to take those world of influences, and secondly, to use them to change the world. And that sense of generously, open-heartedly accepting the world of theatre, to take on something because it is good, but to then use it to forge your own idea. And it may be a kind of new idea, or it may simply be to reinforce the reason why you're doing theatre. Seemed to me then with that actor, and now today as I reflect on his death, a pretty kind of powerful play in terms of the idea. And that one which, in different ways, we have continued to try to articulate through different sorts of plays.
Jatinder Verma, thank you very much.
You're welcome.